Good morning, everybody. If you take your seats, we'll get started here. Just got a text from Jody. He's on his way. I think he said 9:20 is the ETA. So, yeah, when I first got the text from him that he wouldn't be here, he said he's got work commitments. Yeah, and then I saw the work commitments. Reno Air Races.
He was in Lake Tahoe last I talked to him.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, good morning and welcome to the summit. A lot of friendly faces that I've seen in the past, but who has never been to a Stinson Summit? Okay, awesome.
What number is this?
You know, I think it's about 5 or 6. Yeah. So, the summits originated in the Beaumont, Kansas airport there. It's a little grass strip out in the middle of everything. It's 60 miles from the nearest Walmart. Put it in perspective.
He's serious.
Yeah. The nice thing is we didn't lose anybody. I mean, everybody was contained there. So, but there's a lot more to do here, and so we had to leave because we didn't have enough room for everybody. So now we've got a lot of accommodations, and the community of Quincy has been outstanding. And I'll go into some of those details. I will let Randy cover that. But for those of you that don't know, the purpose of the summit is to share knowledge so we can keep our old airplanes flying. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge in this room. And a few of the folks that are on their way that'll be here yet has even additional knowledge. And we welcome the round engine Stinsons. Thank you. Yeah. And, every manufacturer or group, it seems like they've got the next level. So the thing that you would aspire to have. And so that's why I built a hangar with a 50-foot door. So so everybody should aspire to have a different one. I think we may have an L5 here later. So those would also be cool airplanes to add to the fleet. So, but that's the purpose of the summit, to share knowledge and camaraderie, and some of the juicy information I think occurs over a bar or dinner at night. So a lot of folks say, well, I don't need to go to the summit because Randy records everything and shares it on the YouTube tech channel, but actually people that don't come here, they don't know really what happens, the juicy information. I want to thank those of you that came. Number one, quite a commitment for you to come, as well as the speakers. Some of the speakers put a lot of time and energy into their presentations, like Steve we'll hear from later, but everybody has done a lot of hard work. And so speaking of hard work, Randy, would you come up here and tell us about the community of Quincy, what they did for us, and a little bit about some of the details. And Randy has done a tremendous amount of the work here.
Yeah, I'm tired. When we first started talking about having this here in Quincy, I started examining and finding out a few things that we could possibly do here and everything. There is Quincy's big on tourism and getting people into the area and actually bringing more jobs back into the area and everything. There is a program called the Bet on Quincy, which stands for Bring Entertainment to Quincy. And they have a grant program, and we applied for that, and the city gave us $3,000. So that's that's a big help with the bus and the van and everything like that. Quincy, was talking to a few people last night. Quincy was founded in 1835. It is a primarily German town. We had the dubious distinction of having the same number of bars as churches for quite a few years. So. I'm from Quincy. I live out, I told a few people, if you take off runway 4, if it was available right now, take off runway 4 out here and turn about 5 degrees left, you go right over top of my house. So I get to hear everything going by all the time. But anyway, yeah, Quincy's a great little town. I love the area. We love the area. I will tell you, breakfast this morning, the bakery items back there, that's from a place called Underbrinks. Underbrinks was just rated as one of the top 5 small town bakeries in Illinois. So you're privileged. And a company called Randy Industries sponsored the breakfast this morning. So, sure. So if you need things like video production done, or if you have a bunch of old videotapes, old 8mm films, or reel-to-reel audio tapes, even things like that, transferred to modern formats, Randy Industries does that. So, gosh, what else?
How about the details for the chicken drop?
No, okay, sure. Chicken drop. Okay, that's what everybody's here for, right? Okay. So tomorrow morning we go over to Jacksonville, Illinois, and have breakfast over there. The EAA chapter offered to put on a breakfast for us over there. On the way back, we're going to stop by Mount Sterling, Illinois, which is India 63, if you don't know that yet. We have some sheets up here with all that information on it. That's where I keep my airplane. And there is an official targeting system out on the edge of the runway. And there's a pretty good diagram there. I spent some time drawing that up and everything. But we're going to fly down the runway about 200 AGL, and you'll have a chicken with you. It has a number. Each chicken is numbered. Drop it, see how close we get to it. The airport manager, as far as I know, is going to be there to measure and determine who won. And there'll be a fabulous prize for someone. We don't know what it is yet, but it'll be a fabulous prize. What else we got here?
Proclamation.
Oh, proclamation.
Oh, yeah.
So about 2 years ago, I got hired to do some TV commercials for a guy named Michael Trope, who was a local businessman and who was running for mayor. He won. So I called up his office and said, hey, what do you think about making a proclamation, which is basically like a key to the city kind of thing. So I'll skip a lot of the whereases and everything like that. City of Quincy, Illinois, official proclamation. Whereas the International Stinson Club's yearly Stinson Summit has decided to make Quincy Regional Baldwin Field its meeting location for the year 2022, and whereas blah, 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 blah. Now, therefore, I, Michael A. Trope, Mayor of the City of Quincy, on behalf of the City Council and the citizens of Quincy, do hereby proclaim Saturday, September 16th, 2022 as International Stinson Club Day. So, we're on the books, folks. So. Yeah. I would suggest you throw his name around there and see what happens. Real fast. There was a mayor when I was growing up. He was previously a news anchor at the TV station I ended up working at. He lived about 2 blocks down from my house where I grew up at, and the mayor had a tendency to get pretty deep into the bottle, and no cop was going to arrest him. And we lived right on the corner, and he would go right through our yard almost every other night or so, until Dad put some great big pieces of limestone out there and tore the bottom of his car out. Didn't go through our yard anymore after that. So, and last night, everybody enjoyed dinner last night? Okay, that was a place called Tiramisu, if you didn't see the name of it. And I told a few people this as well, but I'll tell it to the group here. Tiramisu, until about 2 years ago, was about a block west of there, closer to the river. They got access to this new building they're in there, moved there a couple of years ago, refurbished it and everything. It was actually a building on the National Historic Register, so they had to go through a bunch of hoops to get that refurbished and everything. Quincy has ties from the 20s and 30s and 40s and even up into the 80s with some shady characters from Chicago. And it's a well-known fact that Al Capone was in the area here quite a few times back in his day and everything. And Quincy was known as Little Chicago. That particular place right there was known as the Park Hotel. And there's a few other places like it in Quincy back in those days. But if you wanted to enjoy the company of a young lady, you could go to the Park Hotel or several other places like that. And they finally did get it closed back in the 80s. So, anyway, I think that's about it for me.
The park across the street you were telling me it was last night.
Oh, yeah, the park across the street, it's called Washington Park. That was the site of one of the Lincoln Douglas debates. It was There's a big boulder out there. If you happen to get down there for some reason, you'll see a big boulder there. That was there during the debates. There was a tree there that was there until I think about 20, 25 years ago. Finally, it died, and they chopped it up and put it wherever it is. The guy who founded Quincy ended up being the governor of Illinois for a while as well. It was John Wood was his name, and there's a community college named after him now too. So, anyway, that's about it for us here. I'll go ahead and head it back to you, and you can go.
Thanks, Randy. And a lot of things behind the scenes that you don't know that had to happen. Randy was on to point for it. Countless media interviews, and we had the TV station out here yesterday. I think they're coming back today, is it? Or tomorrow?
Tomorrow, maybe today or tomorrow. I don't know exactly.
But a lot of things to help promote it. So this event would not be possible without the support of our good sponsors. So some of those sponsors, Aircraft Specialties, the world's largest piston machine shop, also offering new engine parts, produces the product CamGuard, about genuine air and CamGuard. So those of you from that organization, stand up, be recognized. Yeah, or raise your hand, yeah. So on your chairs, you had a catalog, and that comes from Aircraft Hardware, and they gave some certificates. When Jody gets here, we've got a bunch of hats and stuff that we'll be raffling off, as well as the gift certificates to Genuine Aircraft. We'll do that later today or tomorrow. Mid-Continent Aircraft Insurance, and Dave James with the prop balancing. So there you go. Thank you. Also the Coke guy. So
Eric Dolslager.
Eric Dolslager.
Yes.
He donated Coca-Cola back over there. So up on the check-in desk, if you didn't get registered, just check off your name there. And on the right-hand side, please put how many people you're bringing to dinner so they can order the proper number of steaks. Just a quick survey here. Who learned about the Stinson Summit from Facebook? Okay. Who's just come because you've been here before? You heard about it before? Most everybody? Okay. There was a promotional ad that was in the Midwest. It was a little video. Who saw that for the first time and is here because of that? You saw it, but okay. Jason Blair, you saw that? Okay, good. So because we had support from the vendors, we were able to do a little more flexing of our muscles as far as our promotion. And so just real quickly, why are you here? What is the most important thing, Julie, that you want to learn? Is there anything in particular that you guys want to learn? About the members? Okay, cool. Okay. You had your hand up? Somebody had your hand up back here? What do you want to learn? Anything that's not on the agenda?
Tribal knowledge about the aircraft.
Tribal knowledge, yeah.
Shared experience. I want to learn how to get Jody's job. He's either in the Caribbean or Lake Tahoe.
Jody's job.
Word.
That's what the best part really be over.
What?
How Jody does what Jody does.
I think we would all like to know that. Okay.
Airplanes are great and all, but we want to go to the Caribbean.
When
Yeah.
you call me from the Caribbean and say finances of the club are really good.
Okay. So we do need to be sticklers on time, and I'm running just a couple minutes over, but we got a lot of information to cover. And if we allow it to go too late, we're going to run out of time. And so, Dave, why don't you kick it off?
Hey, real quick, the presentation we had up, I've got the
Okay,
light
hey,
there.
on top of the belt pack is a little mute switch.
Okay.
Just slide it over there.
Hello, hello?
There you go.
Got it? Okay. The presentation we had at Beaumont last year, we added some stuff to it. Same thing we did at Oshkosh. How many of you guys have seen that? Probably a third. So, I mean, we can run through it again, and there's some more stuff that we put on it. I've got a bunch more data beyond what the presentation is, but the PowerPoint seems to work about the best, and we can add to it. If somebody's got any comments, they run into something with the airplane along the way, you know, say something. That's what we're here for, is everybody's trying to share learning. What do we got here? I'm from Wayne, Michigan. I live about a mile from the original 108 factory. This is the original factory pre-Wayne days, up through about 1927, 28. That building is still in Northville, Michigan, about 40 miles northwest of Detroit. And prior to that, back in the late 1800s, it was a furniture manufacturer. When E.L. Cord got involved in the company in the late 20s, that's where all the boatload of money came from, where they built the Wayne Stinson plant and the Stinson airport. And I drive by it every day on the way to work, the Wayne plant. The other plant we've got some pictures of here. If you ever get up in that area, there's a lot of cool old aviation history up there. This is the mural we're talking about last night at dinner. That's 455 Katy Street in Northville. That's the old factory. If you walk around the back side of it, the old brick wall, you can see where they used to have an overhead gantry beam that came out. They'd weld the fuselages together in the second story, open the swing out doors and lower them down to the first floor where they do all the dope and fabric work and the finish work on them. And you can see where they cut the beam off and bricked over the old door opening. But you can walk inside that building. It has not been altered. It's got the original wood beams and block walls. It's cool history up there.
What's in there nowadays?
There was a company in there up until the COVID hit that was subletting smaller areas. If you had a mom and pop business in a garage and you did you had one EDM burner machine or you did silk screening, they'd rent small cubicles of area where you'd have an actual business address. And then during the COVID, that kind of went downhill, and it's corporate owned now. I don't know what they're doing, but for a while they were trying to set it up where they had a banquet facility in there. We talked about getting a bunch of the Stinson guys to go up there at one point, but then after the COVID, the whole, I don't know what you call it, the whole concept of the building has changed. They're not into that. Some corporation owns it, but the building is still there. I mean, you can go walk in the building and look around. In Northville, there's a restaurant called Rebecca's in the old town. It's been there forever. The guy and his wife that own it have got a Cessna. They're both pilots. And all along one wall is all old Stinson paraphernalia, pictures, a lot of pictures from back in the day when they built the airplane in Northville in that building I just showed you. And then they had a little airstrip about 2 miles west of town out at 6 Mile and Beck Road. They had the wings off the airplane. They trailered it out there, put the wings on it, and flew it. There's pictures of the old T-hangars out at that airport where they had all the early straight wing Stinsons. That's the Wayne plant there. That's the two original final assembly hangars. It's still there. This picture was taken a couple of years ago. You can actually drive up to the building. It's a mass factory around it, but you can still see the original outline and the footprint of the Stinson. And again, they did the same thing. The second floor is where they did all the primary structural building, welding, and then they had the old gantry that came out. They'd swing the doors out, lower the fuselage to the bottom, put it inside, and continue on. So it was a 2-level manufacturing facility. You can see, where the factory's been added on, but that brick wall going all the way back to the new structure, and then just to the right of the slide is the two Quonset hut-looking buildings. That was the final assembly hangars. I've got another picture I should add to this. It was a picture shot probably back in about 39 or 40, a black and white, and you can see the original factory there, and it said, "Do not land over the hangar," because they had a runway there next to the railroad track, and that's where they'd land and take off from.
Is there still a runway there?
No.
Okay.
No, it's all built up factory. There was a runway there until probably 30, 35 years ago. And then it's all been grown over with trees, and then they bulldozed all that out and they added onto the factory. The whole place was owned by Ford Motor Company at one time, and they sold it about 15 years ago. Now it's all split up into smaller industrial buildings. But there was nobody in the Stinson building as of about 2 months ago. I went in there and the door was unlocked. I went in wandering around. And now there was nothing up in the rafters left. I'd looked. That's my airplane. It's out on the flight line. Been flying it since '87. Been all over the country. I put coming up on 2,100 hours on it since I've had it. Okay, so we're going to start back at the back of the airplane and kind of work our way forward on some of the items you need to keep tabs on and stuff that we've run into that's not really written in books anywhere. The tail wheel, the best one that works on the 108's Scott 3200 or an Alaska Bush Wheel 3200, either or. And you notice the castellated nut holding it to the leaf spring. It's upside down from what the FAA teaches you. They want the nuts on the bottom. Well, according to the parts manual, according to Univer, the assembly drawings, that's how they want it. They want the castellated nut with a cotter pin on top so you can see it on a pre-flight. And where everybody else's has got a grease cert up on that top cap, you see the head of the bolt. The best way to make a Scott 3200 work well is don't grease it. Is if you pump it up full of grease, it's going to get too slippery. The clutch plates won't have any friction in them to dampen the tail wheel. So you get a lot more shimmy if it's over greased. What we do is about every second or third annual, it's up on milk crates anyways to get the tail up in the air to make sure everything is tight back there. We'll just take the wheel off, take that nut off, and we'll get down, clean everything all out, blow it out nice and dry, and put a thin film of lubriplate on it, put it back together, and leave it alone. And it just doesn't give you any trouble. The springs have to have some play in the bottom. If you go out there to the airplane and both of the springs are under tension, then what it's doing is it's pulled the lock pawl loose, and your tail wheel isn't a tail wheel anymore. It's like a caster on a shopping cart. The whole concept with it is you got about 15 degrees travel either direction using your steering with your rudder pedals. Any more than that, if you want to break the tail wheel loose, you hit the brake and lock it up hard, and then it'll kick it off center and release it. But you want it to stay in trail when you taxi. Otherwise, it's a nightmare with a crosswind. If it's under tension, then you've always got pressure on that release pawl, and the tail wheel kicks out right away. So the least little bit of crosswind you got, you don't have a tail wheel holding you straight. You got a caster that's along for the ride. The side view of it, you can get 2 tail wheel tires right now. The McCreary Chenuit, it's a sawtooth pattern. It's a real thin wall. They don't do well on a big tail on a Dash 3. You got to put 60, 65 pounds of pressure in them. If you get them down to about 40 or 45 pounds, it'll blow the sidewalls out of them. This tire Desser Tire makes, if we back up, if you look at the tread pattern, how it's just the rib pattern like the main tires, that's the heavy duty tail wheel tire. Desser Tire out of Memphis sells them. They're about 10 bucks more than the cheap McCreary. On a small tail, you could damn near run it flat, not have any air in it. It's that rigid a tire. But I've not seen anybody blow one of those out on a Dash 3.
It's got Dessert's name on it?
No, Desser sells it.
Okay.
You can look online on their website and you can see the tire options, and the Chenuit McCreary is about 10 bucks cheaper than that one. But it's a much better tire.
Dave, on my inner tube, the nipple is, I have to use a screwdriver to pry it back so I can get air in it. What did I do wrong? Did I put the wrong inner tube in there? Or?
Not really, they're tight on all of them. You got the little 90-degree stem that comes out of there, but there's not much room.
Yeah.
What a lot of guys will do is when they're going to put air in the tail wheel tire, they'll put one of the extensions on it, put it on there and hit it, and then take the extension off, put the cap back.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's real tight to get a tire chuck down there. It's not uncommon to have to pry it over with a screwdriver and hold it while you put air in it.
Okay.
Tail wheel attach points, an AN5-26. The manual calls out for a 25. The problem with that is the bolt is got no washers under it, so when you push the bolt through, the edge of the threads are right at the steel bracket, and it's like a meat cleaver trying to shear it. So by putting one size longer bolt in there, the 26, it gives you the room where you can put a washer on either side of it, and it gets the threads out of the way of the shear point area. Dash 3s are bad for it. They'll, with that long arm and the big tail, you get a good crosswind. Imagine the side load you're putting on that little 5/16 diameter bolt. So what I did with it is I put the longer bolt, it's got the bushing inside. The trick with it is when you put it on there, the bushing inside is slightly wider than the gap. You put AN960-6 washer, a thin washer, thick washer, to shim it to where there's no gap where it won't slap side to side. If there's any play in it sideways, when you put a side load on it, it's just accentuating the arm and moment, and you'll pop the head or pop the tail off the bolt. The other trick that we figured out was if you drill the head, that's supposed to have a castellated nut on it, not a lock nut. So if you drill the head, you capture it through the head, start out on the side where you got the tail, go through there with safety wire, come all the way around, go through the head of the bolt, and then come around it and capture it back with the tail. So you've safety wired it completely with a ring like this. Pass it around. So you go out, and if you pop the head on that bolt on takeoff, you're going to catch it on your next pre-flight walk around. You'll see it busted off there because it's held with a safety wire. And the safety wire being captured, it won't let the bolt come out of the hole, so your tail wheel is going to be there when you land. And yes, they have fallen off. We've had people call. The amazing part is, since we've been capturing them like that with a safety wire, we've never broke a bolt. I just passed it around. You guys can take a look at it. Some of the areas when we're doing the annual that people don't look at, up in the wing behind the fuel tanks, you got a flap return system in it. There's a big giant spring. There's usually an inspection hole where the bell crank is for your flap rod to come out. You look in there with a light. The early Stinsons, 108, 108-1s, they were not forgings, they were weldments, and they just had a hole drilled in a piece of steel with the other end of that spring stuck through there. Well, after 75 years, the hole gets elongated, it saws through the spring. That's an area you want to keep an eye on. Just go up there every annual and shoot some engine oil on it, just so it stays lubricated where you're not rubbing metal to metal all the time. If you get it to the point where it's sawed through the spring, it's an absolute bear to change. So the other end of that spring is buried behind the fuel tank. There's no inspection holes there, and it's 24 inches from the fuselage. So you end up having to cut a hole back there, making some kind of a tool that you can pull the spring from the root end of the wing to draw it tight to get it up into the hole. You can see that through one of the holes with a borescope to see how the inboard end of the spring is holding up.
Have an O series?
Yeah. Yeah, the early ones were worse. The later ones, the later Dash 2s and the Dash 3s, it was a aluminum forging. So they had a bushing in that hole at the flap bracket, but the inside, that piece there, the inboard end of that spring is the same on all of them. It's an area that you don't ever look at. That's the inboard end of the flap return spring. There's the actuator bracket. That's the outboard end of it. Another area that's real common for corrosion. I mean, back in the day, the airplanes used to be tied down out in the grass because there was no hangars. And it's like with every other tail dragger, anything, the last 3 feet of the airplane was exposed to all the dampness coming up out of the ground, so the tails all rotted out of them. Another area, low spot, is the cluster right at the landing gear where the brackets are for the wing struts. So pull the streamliner fairings off when you do the annual and get in there and look for rust. It was bad enough back in the day that Univair made a whole cluster kit. You could buy the, it's like, hey, this thing is rotted. You'd buy it and it had about 12 inches of tubing already welded to it. Cut it out and section it in. They knew right where it was going to rot. Most of the airplanes have been restored, epoxy primed, painted, kept in concrete hangars, so we don't get near the corrosion that you used to have with the airplanes. They're a much better environment when they're not flying. If you're ever going to go out and you're going to do it, is anybody in here looking at buying a Stinson? Everybody's already got one that wants one? Okay.
Aren't we all looking for another one?
No. Okay, all right. How many guys own a Stinson? How many guys have another project? There you go. AD note on the Stinson on the rudder cables on the pulleys. Originally they had a small 2-inch diameter pulley up under where your pedals are. Got that streamliner fairing off the landing gear. It's easy to see. Easiest way to tell, other than getting a tape measure and measuring it, they just went to a bigger diameter pulley. It's actually a Piper service bulletin for compliance. Piper took Stinson over 49. The bulletin and the AD note came out in 1950, so that's why it's got a Piper part number for the service bulletin. What they did is the small diameter pulley had a fairly tight radius where the cable changed direction. They had a tendency to wear in there.
If you change that pulley, or find an airplane that needs the pulley changed, you also have to change the cable?
No,
Okay.
no. The cable's got enough play in the ends for the threaded turnbuckles where you can adjust it out. If you're gonna go buy an airplane or you got your airplane and you look in the logbooks and it's like, oh, somebody signed that off, physically go look at it. I've seen 3 or 4 of them where the AD note's been signed off and they've still got the original pulleys in them. That's the post AD note compliance. You see the bigger diameter and you see there's no gap between the cable guard and the pulley. So I mean, you don't even really need a tape measure. You can pull that streamliner fairing off the top of the landing gear leg and you can look right in there and see what's in there. That's usually the only area on the rudder pedals that wear, is right in that radius. So when you're checking them in an annual, have somebody pull the pedals away from their natural neutral position so you can get in there. And the best way to check the cables is to take a rag, just a shop rag, and wipe it on the cable and see if you catch any of the frays. But pull it away from where it normally sits neutral, because that's where it's going to wear. So you want to have somebody push full right rudder and then full left rudder and check the cable. Landing gear leg bracket. How many guys have ever broke these in their 108s? Almost everybody. And you take it out and you get somebody to weld it, or you pay Univair another $100 for another piece. Okay, mine, I got tired of doing that, so I made one. Well, I didn't make it because you can't manufacture a part, but I repaired it. Pass that one around. I did that probably 15 years ago, haven't broke one since. I took the original bracket, used a stainless steel worm gear clamp, a real long one, cut sections out of it, laid the old one out as a template, and then I bent a new one out of the spring stainless steel and put floating box nuts on it with machine screws. So it's not rigid mounted, it's got a little bit of give to it, and I haven't broke one since. Putting the new part on wasn't as irritating as trying to line it up and get the holes where they used to be. Yeah. I don't care how close you are with a Sharpie and putting marks, it just doesn't work. This one I actually went over the top. I countersunk the inside and put screws on it that are slightly extended into the clamp, so when it's torqued up to the tube, If I did break one of the legs, I don't even have to take it off the airplane. I just undo the nut. There's enough friction there to hold the head of the countersunk screw. Fabric covering over the gas tanks. Does anybody run into that? It's not illegal. Contrary to what people say, you can have fabric over the gas tanks. The AD note only applies to the Dash 2 and the Dash 3. Univair couldn't tell me why it didn't apply to the straight 108 and the 108-1. You can put a 540 Lycoming and a small tail, go faster than any of them, but the AD note doesn't apply. Doesn't make any sense. But you can cover the top of the gas tanks. You cannot do it in a sock, one wing cover. You have to cover the wing, have the fabric go down the bays with the gas tank out of the wing, go down, you attach it with the Plyobond, super seam cement, whatever that you want to use for your covering process. The fabric has to be glued down into the trough around the spar, and then you put the tank in that actually holds the fabric in place. Then you can cover over the wing if you want it to look like it's a fabric covered wing. What they were concerned about was if you just did the blanket method over the top and the gasoline got underneath the filler neck hole and lifted the glue, the fabric comes up off the wing and it changes the airfoil difference. Now you got a thick wing on one side that's all inflated, and you got a normal wing on the other side. There's also the chance of the air getting under there and eventually tearing the fabric loose of the wing. So this way, if the fabric did depart the airplane, it's not going to make any difference because the structural part of it is all trapped by the gas tank. You don't have to disassemble anything to look. You can look through the inspection holes in the bottom of the wing, and you can see the trace of the fabric that's coming down and around the lip that's been glued in there. I think yours is that way, isn't it? Yeah. Anybody got the original corrugated aluminum breather tube? Do you constantly get a little bit of oil weeping at the back of the engine?
I get it dripping on the top cover where it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, the breather's got oil residue going through it. That's porous. That's not a sealed tube. I don't know why they ever did that. That works really well for a blast tube on the generator, but that's about it. Yeah, if you get, people chase oil leaks, and that's usually what it is. It's, you run your fingers along the bottom of that tube and there's always oil there. Fix for that is MIL 6000-14, 7/8 ID breather hose. Get about a 4-foot length of it from Spruce or any of the vendors. And the other trick with it is most people have the breather tube come out of the breather cap, goes through the firewall, or through the baffling to the firewall horizontally. Well, the oil can't go uphill. So if you take your breather hose, when you put the new stuff that's sealed, it doesn't weep, and you run it up just about to the point where you can touch the upper cowling touches it, it's going uphill. That's going to knock 90% of the oil off the belly away. That's the front coming off the breather cup. You can see how it's already going uphill when it goes through the baffle. A lot of prop seal leakage. People call up, need a prop seal. And it's like, well, where's it leaking? Well, it's on the windshield. That's how do you know it's a prop? Because the whole top of the engine's wet. This is an extreme top pan cover that we had come in. I've found them where we actually could not find the crack on the airplane. If you think you got a prop seal, before you take anything apart, blow the top of the front of the engine off clean, take some white paper towels and duct tape them over the front section of it, and go out and fly the airplane for 20 minutes. Can't do it for 10 minutes because it doesn't get hot enough to open the crack up. We found this out. Go fly it for about 20 minutes, get it operating temperature and heat soak, and the crack will open up, and you'll see the back of the paper towel is wet, the outside of the paper towel is dry. It's not your prop seal, it's, you got a crack in the front pan. It's real common with them. We've probably changed a dozen of them over the years. Not quite this extreme, but they were the dye marks from the stamping. It was a real tight corner, and eventually they just fatigue and they crack up there. That was on an airplane we were working on, and He said he'd been chasing an oil leak for a year.
Wow.
But if you look at it, that hole where the pan gasket goes up underneath it, even if you have the silicone gasket, the crack is beyond it. So it's still gonna weep. But normally we'll see them where they're cracked about 2 inches, and we've taken them off the engine and you heat them up with a heat gun and you can actually see the crack open up. My airplane has got a full filter system on it. I came up with it about 30 years ago, long before Airwolf was in existence, and Turbotech and Seaplanes Inc. had all gone bankrupt, so there was nothing out there. So I got a field approval putting a TransDAP 1045 race car adapter on it. Still got, guys are still putting them on. The TransDAP, Jegs Racing sells them for about 45 bucks a piece, the housing. By the time you buy the fittings and the hose, you got about $250 in parts for the filter kit. So there's absolutely no reason you shouldn't have a filter on your airplane. Takes a standard 3/4 16 thread filter, CH48 108 or 109. About 5-6 years ago, Paul and I put the Challenger Aviation STC cleanable filter adapters on it. Spins on the same housing, same thing, did it with a field approval. A couple of the guys have asked Challenger to add the Stinson to the STC list. They can't do it because all the STCs that Airwolf has, and it's an airframe modification. All the STCs for the Challenger Aviation system are all engine mounted adapters. Like if you got a Continental 0470, you take the spin-on filter off the engine, put this on it. It's an engine STC. By having a remote filter that was never part of the type certificate data sheet, it's an STC product. That's an airframe modification, so they can't add it to their engine STC. But the guys have been doing it with no problem with the field approvals. As long as they get one that's previously been done by the FAA, get them a copy of the 337, and their FAA seem to be good with it. It's always been a PMA part, just not STC'd for that application.
So that filter will screw on the adapter that I've
Yeah,
got with 48108?
I mean, well, the supply chain, you guys run into this, I mean, the filters, they're non-existent.
Have always been available. I get those easier than anything else.
Yes.
Champion's ones you can thank for your filter shortage because they thought their bridges were bigger than they are. Tempest, they ran into there's a magnet in there that was made in China, is their problem. We got filters being made for CamGuard right now, so we're having a big answer. But the Challenger is probably the best filter out there. It's 20 microns better than any paper filter out there. It's a 60, where your typical paper filter is 40. So I'm a big Challenger.
If you got a 2 to 3 thousandths bearing clearance between your main, your rods, and your crankshaft, and the micron rating for that filter is less than half that. So that stainless steel mesh that's inside that unit is going to take particles out of the system that are half the diameter of the clearance you've got in the bearing journals. So nothing's going to go through there and score anything. It stops it.
And the machine work on that filter.
Oh,
You
it's
can look at it and you wish your airplane was built like this.
that whole system by design. I wish it would have had a picture of it taking it apart. What was killing us with the Franklin, you got a 25-hour oil change interval. Well, the filters, before Champion went stupid, they're upwards of $40, $42 by the time you pay the shipping and the sales tax on one filter. Well, when you figure that out on a 25-hour oil change, you're paying $1.50 an hour to fly the airplane just to cover the oil filter cost. You know, it gets pricey. So we put these on. The kits are about $300 for the adapter, and they've got a 5-year life on the screen itself inside. You change it. They're not that expensive. The whole kit was less than $300 when we bought them. I think they're only just, what, 300? Yeah, 310. They haven't gone up like the rest of the world has. But yeah, Joel's right. I mean, you look at the machining on it, you know, you order it, it's like, oh damn, $300 for an oil filter. But when you get it in the box and you look what's actually there, the quality, it's like, no. Yeah, it's something that's really, yeah. Well, what you do is you run the system. It's got magnets that are inside, so any ferrous metals is going to attach to the magnet. you take it off the airplane just like a normal spin-on with the nut, with the wrench, and the center section, you push it, quarter twist it to the left, and it all disassembles. And there's a spring loaded in there, and there's a stainless steel screen mesh, and you back blow it out. And you can look in it, you don't have to cut anything, you don't have to disassemble anything, you look, see if you've got any particles in it, you back blow it out, clean everything out, put it right back on and use it again, over and over and over and over. So at 40 bucks a piece, every 25 hours, it doesn't take very long to offset the price of the standard filters. The other one, you guys, how many of you got Airwolf filter kits on your airplanes? Okay, so they put it down on the left underneath the heat box right next to the exhaust pipe, and it's vertical. So I don't care how you stand on your head, you go to spin it off and you got hot oil running down your elbow, make a mess. Like I said, I don't know why they did it that way. Some of the people lately have been using my paperwork because it's field approval, taking the Airwolf kit, mounting it over on the right side engine mount like I did mine, where it's wide open, and using that as a minor deviation from the STC, and the FAA has been accepting it. So you could probably do the same thing with the existing one, just move it with a 337 from the left side over to the right side where it's more accessible. When I designed this system, I didn't want to punch holes in the firewall. I just didn't want to do it, because then you got to put doublers and you're compromising the structure. So it's mounted on an 1/8 inch aluminum 2024 plate on the right engine mount where it's wide open, there's nothing else there. I can crack that filter loose, let it drip down into a trough, I don't even get my hands dirty.
Can it help with cooling at all?
No, not noticeable. Another one I've done to that airplane was I took the lead acid battery from under the seat. Mine's the early 46. Moved it up onto the firewall, put an Odyssey PC680 on it with a field approval, took 27 pounds off the empty weight of the airplane, and the longest, highest current carrying wire is that from the ground point up. The other ones coming off the relay going to the starter are about 6 inches. The Odysseys run about 125 bucks to replace them. Last price on a Concorde 35 was pushing $400.
Plus the maintainer.
Yeah. We get about 6 years out of one of those. If any of you guys are looking to improve your engines, put later model parts in it that we'll get into in a little bit. If you ever run across a helicopter engine core out of the Army, most of the parts in that will fit the 165. Some of the stuff fits the 150. We talk about the heavy connecting rods, the heavy rockers, the sodium cooled exhaust helicopter valves, all the bulletproof parts that you can put in a 165 to make it a better engine, they all come from that engine. So if anybody ever runs across one, out of a vocational school somewhere, somebody had one laying in a building somewhere, and you can buy it, the cylinders, the crank, and the case will not fit. Everything else does. They're all the same parts. It's just that's all the later model parts. They're all the updated stuff. What we gonna do here, Brett? There we go, thank you. So they're 6V335 or 6V4200 is the designation on the data plate. We'll talk about some of the tools. How many of you guys work on your own airplanes? Yeah, most of you, okay. I know, you got a Lycoming, you don't have to work on it. There's a handful of special tools that you need to do the normal maintenance, like upper end maintenance, I guess you'd call it on a Franklin. Intake manifold, the bolts are buried. You can't get up there with a normal socket and a normal wrench. Snap-on makes tools that will fit up there just like they're made for it. The quarter-inch flex socket, half-inch, a breaker bar. You can take a half-inch Craftsman socket, grind it down so it's a shallow socket. That's pretty much all you need to get the manifolds on and off. Without them, you'll fight with it for 2 or 3 hours. If you got the right tools, 5 minutes, it's off or on. Simple.
That short socket,
Yeah. And it's nothing special about it. A 6-point Craftsman, grind it down as shallow as you can get it. You grind it down to where the head of the bolt is in the socket and you have no more material beyond it, just so you're getting a full grip on it. And that's just about the right depth. The flex sockets, I picked up a bunch of spare tools. I've got some up here if anybody wants to buy some after we're done. I've got some of the flex sockets. That's how going up into the manifold. On the right side, you got a breaker bar with a little short socket to break them loose. 12-inch extension on that quarter-inch dry flex socket. It rips those nuts, the bolts right in and out of there. Lock washers. You got star locks and then you got split locks. The factory manual calls out for the star washers on the right. They work well in most applications. On the intake manifolds on a Franklin, they're not worth a hill of beans. Pass some of these around. The split lock washers have a better grip. There's no steel washer or anything except the head of the bolt and that star washer going into an aluminum casting. The heat and contraction cycles and the vibration, they come loose to the point where when you change oil at 25-hour increments, you go around and look to make sure the bolts are all still in there and you hit them with the socket, check them for tight. Since we started using the split lock washers on it, we've never had one come loose. We don't even think about it anymore. When you make contact with that washer, you've got to go almost a full revolution on that bolt to get it to bottom out where you're tight. So the star washer, it'll vibrate to the point where it'll chew little knurls into the manifold and it's loose, which causes the most common roughness in a Franklin is an intake leak. Lyle Tool made a push rod remover tool for Franklin. They called it for a big block Ford lifter, but it just happens to fit a Franklin. Jegs Racing bought the tooling. There's one if you guys want to come up and look at it. It's a slide hammer. It's got an expander on the end of it. You put it inside the lifter tube, turn it about 3 turns till it's snug, and the slide hammer just pops the push rod tube out. You don't damage anything. And these, they only get about 35 bucks for it. Everybody's talking on the website about getting factory original tools to work on their engine. That's all wonderful, except the factory tools were built for the military. I'll pass this one around. Weighs about 4 pounds. You want to carry this in the airplane in the toolbox? This is the official Franklin push rod tube installer. Threads onto the rocker stud up at the top. Use mechanical leverage, pushes it in. But it's heavy. This is a 1/2-inch bolt with a stainless steel washer and a nut. Weighs probably a couple ounces. It's about 7 bucks in parts. I got a bunch of them here. I get 10 bucks a piece for them. That and an 8-inch adjustable does the same job as that. You can throw it in your toolbox. Jack Stewart's coming. I think he's supposed to do stuff on lifters and push rod tube installations. I'm going to give him one of these and he can show that as well. That's what it looks like disassembled. Real simple. What we do is we get the socket head bolt. We found one that was just the right diameter put the nut and the washer on it with a piece of shrink tubing. The shrink tubing protects anything from scratching the inside of the pushrod tube shroud, and it just slip fits in, absolutely perfect. Put the pushrod up, drop it in the hole, use the adjustable wrench, adjust the jaws to 5/16 to match the diameter of the stud that holds the rocker in. You just use your mechanical advantage, it just pushes it right in, simple. The tool on the right is the original factory pushrod remover. Really, really complex. That Jegs Racing tool does the same thing. A lot of the guys have gone beyond that, and they cut the T-handle down and just put it solid to the point where they can put it in the pushrod tube, and they just use an adjustable wrench over the rocker stud and use the mechanical advantage and pull it out. Then it's a real small tool, you can just throw it in your toolbox with you. All this military stuff is huge and heavy and steel. This is one that one of the guys was watching us, we're messing with it last night, pulling a pushrod tube on one of them. That's what we call the holy grail of pushrod tube removers. It took me about 10 tries and I got it. This one, I machined the parts, goes in the tube, thread the center rod in, then there's another nut on top of the housing. You just run that nut down with a box end wrench and it just pulls the tube out through the center of the tube. Another factory Franklin tool. The guys are asking about what do you guys do about bleeding the lifters? Check the dry clearances. Well, this is the factory tool. I think it weighs about 6 pounds. A little overkill. All that does is you collapse it, put it underneath the rocker arm, between the rocker arm and the head, release the pressure, and this giant spring forces the lifter to collapse. It does okay. It's so big though, it won't get up under the front cylinders when the cowling's on it. 1/4-inch piece of chain link and a 12-inch 3/8 extension does the exact same thing. Same thing, it's in your toolbox. You don't even know it's there. Craftsman socket. It's an old part number socket. I don't even know if they're in production anymore. There's a handful up here that we've picked up. It's the only socket that we found that's deep enough reach to work on the 14mm Franklin spark plugs, but it's also got a hex at the end of it, so it'll work on that top right front one up under the grill that you can't get a socket and a wrench in. You can drop that on it, go in there with an open end wrench and crack the spark plug loose. Real simple. We're talking about the tools. There's a lot of specialized tools for doing lower end maintenance when you get into pulling gears and pullers. All the upper end stuff, like if you got to pull a cylinder off, send it out. If you got to pull a cylinder and pull the valves out of it and have somebody grind and change them. I got one here I'll sell you, Mark. You don't have to take pictures. Get that wallet out. This is for a General Motors Buick V6. It just happens to fit a Franklin like it was made for it. Same. It's like Franklin made these elaborate military tools. This does the same thing. 3/8 drive. So you can just take your ratchet or your breaker bar. That gives you the leverage, goes under the rocker, and you can pull the valve springs out. A lot of times you get one where you got carbon or something under an exhaust valve and it's like, I don't want to send the cylinder out just to get that done. The local mechanic can fix it if he had the tools. Well, that tool with a block of wood in the center of the cylinder on the vise, you can pull the valves out and he can grind and lap everything and put it all back, and that tool's like 25 bucks. All this stuff, I mean, you could get a whole set of upper end working tools to maintain that Franklin for probably $200. Somebody made a bunch of those push rod installers. I think they're selling that tool for $200, and it's still 4 pounds of ballast in the airplane. Brett? Oh, there we go. We're back again. Yeah. Cylinder base wrenches, same thing. Everybody wants an original set of cylinder base wrenches. You can compare them, I'll pass these around. These are snap-on torque adapters. FRES 18 and a 20, 9/16 and 5/8. This and that 12-inch extension will take any of the cylinders on and off that engine and torque them. Those big cylinder base wrenches, proportional to the size of these, you can set. They're not going in your toolbox. They're too big. They also will not get the bottom cylinder base nuts if the engine's in the airplane. The engine mount gets in the way. Those cylinder base wrenches were designed when they were overhauling the engine and it was up on a stand with nothing else on it. These will do the same thing. Snap-on truck gets 65 bucks a piece for them plus taxes or whatever. We've been picking them up. I've got 3 or 4 sets of them here. We get 100 bucks for the set. The cylinder base wrenches, I think they're getting a couple $100 a piece for them, but they won't work when the cowling and everything and the manifolds are on the airplane. We're just trying to come up with a bunch of simple, normal, generic tools that you can put in the toolkit and you got everything covered. You're not trying to hunt up tools. Seems to be the hardest part with dealing with the old airplanes is not finding somebody to do the work, is having the parts and the tools to do it. How many of you guys have seen the curved wrenches? Back in the day, they were called a manifold wrench. They used to use them on the old cars. It's a snap-on CX1820. Use that in there. That'll get any of the cylinder base nuts off a 150, 165, 180. It'll break them all loose. It's a real thin wall. It's got just the right angle. You can use the torque adapters, take them on and off. They're plenty strong enough. This will break all the nuts loose. Then you can finger them off. The torque adapters will get you to your torque setting to put them back on again. Same thing, it's standard off-the-shelf snap-on wrench. Lost it again, Brett. Oh, there we go. Keeps coming in and out. How many of you guys have ever checked your cable tensions on the airplane? What did you use for a tool?
Borrowed an expensive.
The $1,500 one in the wood box. Yeah. Yeah, you can buy, these are less than $200. They're designed for sailboat rigging. Little tool, works real well. This is a drawing from Univer. Main reason for this was showing the stack up, the proper stack up for the spinner. I've seen probably 20 different configurations of people putting spinners and props together on the Stinsons. There's not 2 of them the same. That's the proper stack up with the bushings, the backing plates, the bolts, the sizes. They revised the drawing a while back. It used to be requiring 51 thou safety wire to safety the prop bolts. They revised it to now it's 41 thousandths, which is standard wire that most mechanics have got in a box. The original service manual calls out for the torque specs. It's for the wood prop. That original manual, there was no metal props back then. So they published this bulletin, and this is for the Macaulay or the Cincinnati metal props. That's the torque spec. Top is the starter ring gear for our engines. The bottom is a torsional absorber out of a 180 or 220 Franklin. I got FAA approval and approval from Franklin in Poland that I can put a torsional damper in a 150 or 165. You don't get rid of the harmonics range on the tachometer. You'd have to go through flight testing and a bunch of engineering garbage, but it eliminated the vibration range of the metal prop. I can put feet on the floor on my airplane and sit there and go in and out of that range. You feel nothing. It's gone. You know, guys are talking about going, you know, putting a new $4,000 prop on, doing this, doing, you know, go back to the wood prop. It's been proven the wood props are not efficient aerodynamically as much as the metal props for performance. The metal prop will flat out perform a wood prop. That's why they quit building them. They went to metal. The problem with the harmonics is not necessarily on a tail dragger a harmonic that cracks the crankshafts. I don't believe that, contrary to what a lot of the people do. What we found is cracking the crankshafts is people running them into things. No, I mean, a Cessna 170 has the same propeller on it, a 1A170, DM7654, 0300 Continental. And you go look at the failure statistics on those crankshafts and those engines, and a 172 that had the same crankshaft, the same propeller, they have no failure rates. But the 170s, they do. Well, what's the common factor? It's a tail dragger. They keep running them into things. And we've documented it in logbooks that after 3 prop strikes, the crankshaft will break. But yeah, it adds some weight to it, but it's a bolt-in. You can buy a torsional damper. I've seen them as low as $1,200, $1,300 pop up for sale, as high as $2,000. You don't have to take the engine out of the airplane. You can do it in the back, pull the accessory case out, and with a couple of gear pullers, you can swap them out. If it's out of the airplane, it's a piece of cake. It takes about a half hour. But I've got one in mine out there. Physical overlay, they're identical for size. It is the ring gear. But that's what they did on the 180 and the 220 Franklin, so there is no placard for harmonics with a constant speed. That's exactly what it is. It's a viscous damper. Okay, that's the disclaimer from Univair. The manual that was published last was in the 60s for the Franklin and the Stinson. Anything subsequent data to that manual was incorporated into service bulletins, service letters, AD notes. A lot of STCs have got instructions for continued airworthiness to modify them. So if you take that original 1948 publication that you thought, hey, I've got an original manual, it's all obsolete data in it. A lot of the numbers have changed. The way the FARs are written, FAR 4313 says that when you're maintaining a product, an aircraft, or an engine, you have to use the most current data available to you. And a lot of the guys will say, well, a service bulletin, I'm not operating commercially Part 135, so I don't have to comply with service bulletins. Well, if the manual says that anything after 1963, then you have to use service bulletin, service letter, service instructions as a revision to the manual. Now that's becomes permanent, current data for maintaining that product. So all of a sudden the service bulletins, yeah, now they are mandatory. Not by 135 standards, but to maintain that product it is. Lycoming is the same way. Lycoming overhaul manual is about that thick. The manual with the service bullets and service letters is that thick. So whenever I overhaul a Lycoming, I've got to go back and I've got to research every bulletin up to date that applies to that engine and figure out if that's a superseded publication from the original manual. We've got a guy just new to the group, Jonathan Whitaker. He just bought the Tri-Gear Stinson down in Oklahoma, the 1083 with the tricycle. I sent this to him. He says, all right, that was fair enough. A couple other things we've got that weren't in here. Let's see here. How often do you guys pull the magnetos out of your engines and look at them? Not just check the timing at annual. Notwithstanding when it quits and it won't run. This is an impulse coupling out of a Bendix mag, come out not too long ago. Customer sent it in, said, well, it's running fine, I just need it looked at. And the mag hadn't been out of the airplane in 20 years. So when we pulled it apart, it was full of oil. The oil seal had failed years ago, but it failed not to the point where it lubricated the impulse coupling spring. The impulse coupling spring, I don't know how it still worked. So we tell the guys this is every 5 years, there's a service bulletin from Slick, there's another service bulletin from Bendix that says to do, I think it's Bendix is service bulletin 643. It says every 5 calendar years or 400 hours time in service, take the mag off, inspect this, 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 and this. It's a simple check. You pull it apart, change the oil seal, look at the points, check it for any oil inside, clean it all out, put it back together, set the E-gap angle, put it back on the airplane, and it'll run 100% better. If you stay ahead of it like that, it's never going to let you down when you're 1,000 miles from home on a trip. Landing gear, the oleos. How many of you guys have ever had the oleos out of your airplane? Did you change the bolts in the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, here's some of them that we've taken out. Some of them, no documented history from the original bolts that they were in there. And not one of them we've ever taken out went back in the airplane. There was always, there's one here that you can actually see it's bent. The guys that are running the Franklins, Tim's going to cover some of this on his presentation with the Franklin. In fact, I think that's him, he just taxied in. There's some service bulletins on the 150, 165. 1960, service instruction number 8, talked about the connecting rods. The 150s, I've never seen one break a rod bolt with the original rods. They're RPM limited, they just don't put that much power out. The 165, if you've got the original rods in it, they're supposed to come out in 1960, and they do pop the heads off the rod bolts. And when it does that, it destroys the engine, and you land off airport. Then there's a whole bunch of paperwork involved. And when you overhaul the engine, it wasn't a big deal. It was $1,000, $1,200 for a set of the heavy duty rods. But people will Magnaflux the old ones and put them back in. The original Franklin manual, 63, was the last publication. Prior to that, the manuals all said any subsequent data to this is incorporated in service bulletins. And that service bulletin said all Franklin engines, next time the rods are removed, install this new and improved heavier rod, because the early ones, if you overspeed them, they break. And they do. And even recently, in the last couple of years, we've had them where the guys, they have a low time engine, but it came apart through a rod, took out the crankcase, the crankshaft, just destroyed everything, and it had the old rods in it that should have come out 60 years ago. The new rods that they put in will handle anything up to 250 horse turbocharged helicopter engine at 3,100 RPM. So there's no way you're ever going to break it in 150 or 165. You run it full throttle, you couldn't hurt it. The rocker assemblies, same thing. The last revision parts manual in the 60s reflected all the current part numbers of these pieces. Didn't show the old parts. You had early 150s had stamped steel rockers. They fail, they come apart, break, you lose a valve, take off, departure, whatever, it's not good. There's 4 series of rockers. The first ones were stamped steel, they were only in the 150. 165, they progressed and made them heavier and heavier, to the point where the latest current part number rocker is a forged rocker, takes a 9/16 wrench to adjust the head on it for your dry clearances. If it takes a 1/2 inch wrench to adjust it, that's the old style, they're light and they break. There's one of each here on an assembly. You can look at it and you can see how they beefed them up and made them heavier to where they won't fail. Same thing, the current rocker is the same one they put in a 220 Franklin, all the helicopter engines. In a 150 or 165, you don't even think about it, it would never break. Intake flanges, anybody have an intake leak where the packings go in the corners? There was the early original 150, 165 used a stamped steel flange on the end of the tubes. 2 on the balance pipe, 4 on the back coming off the carburetor to the intake logs. The 165 was the last engine that they did that on. Any subsequent engine after that, they used a machined 1/4 inch thick aluminum flange. It holds the packings absolutely flat in there, doesn't let them move, and you get no air leaks. That's something else. When we do the overhauls on the engines, we make sure we put all the heavy flanges on it. I've got some of those if anybody needs any. All these little tiny things that you can do is where you get the reliability on the engine. Invariably, when somebody breaks something, it's an early part that should have been taken out years ago that broke. Anybody got any questions on some other stuff they've run into with the Stinsons? They just keep running and running and running and never break?
Back to the oil filter thing.
Okay.
Trying to clarify, will that spin-on filter that you've got fit on, I've got it's little red arrow, I think it's mounted on
Yeah.
the left side.
Yep.
It uses a 48108
Yep.
filter. Will that filter
Yes.
fit on there?
Bolts right on, just got to do a field approval.
Okay.
Yep. If you do it through the Detroit district, they've done 3 or 4 of them for me.
Okay.
So Rick Anderson knows all
So
about
you
it.
could help with it.
Yeah.
I've got the same thing on my Harley. Harley's dealer, or not dealer, the shop sold me it several years ago, and it's really.
Yeah, it's like Joel said, they work wonderful. I mean, the old screens that the Lycoming used to have, they were much, much coarser mesh. If you look at one of these with it's all disassembled, the quality of the machining it's incredible. Yeah, it's real good.
You know, I use a Tempest filter, and I was led to believe that Tempest had a magnet in there, but I learned that it does not.
The Tempest does have a magnet in there.
It does?
Yeah.
Where's it at?
In the bottom.
On the base. Is it underneath that flange is where the nut's at? I took mine apart.
It's just on the filter part, like where we pull it out, like silicone type of stuff right there holding it.
Well, I heard that they run out of them for a while. They made a whole bunch without magnets.
Negative, that's the reason I didn't use it.
That's why they couldn't. It didn't meet the type design.
PMA has to have a magnet. That's where they messed up on their
That
PMA.
was a rumor I heard. Yeah, I use Tempest all the time.
So a Tempest, in my opinion, is better than a Champion for that.
The Challenger's superior, both of them. Yeah.
20 microns better,
Yeah.
and some you can reuse.
Oil cooler.
Oil coolers, you get the original Harrison 102s, brass, 17 pounds, and the only time they don't leak is when they're on the bench with no oil in them. Little Red Arrow holds the STC for the current production 13 passage Harrison, but they don't support the STC anymore. So Pacific Oil Cooler makes one. I've put 2 of them on, had no success with it. So without getting into details, if somebody wants to talk to me about what we ran into afterwards, I can do that. But the Harrison 13 passage, guys have been putting them on with field approvals. Another trick that we've found is if you buy one off of an airplane that was parted out, and you can get the documentation, you can get an A&P to sign off that he removed that STC filter kit from that airplane, the STC oil cooler kit from that airplane, and it's no longer supported by the manufacturer or the holder of the STC, then you've got the documentation, the paperwork, the traceability on that kit, you can put it on your airplane.
What's the Niagara?
Niagara Harrison, it's the same, just different manufacturer, 13 passage. Yeah, they work well. It's what we've got on most of the airplanes. They weigh about 3 pounds. It's like the whole trick with this stuff, it's like, yeah, horsepower is great, but you kind of get the airplane as light as you can. Like even all the stuff that I've done to my airplane, the vortex generators, the extended flaps, the big tires, the empty weight on my airplane dry with full of oil is 1,176 pounds on the 850s. And it's right at 1,200 if I put the 26-inch bush wheels on it. So it's got plenty of horsepower because you keep the airframe light. Dash 3s weigh 200-300 pounds more than that, some of them. That's where, you still got all that weight you got to get moving, and it's got the exact same wing area. So you get the wing loading down and you get better performance. One last thing, how many of you guys have got 150 horse? Just a few of you. You got the STC. Can't get nothing out of you, can I? I've got an STC that I hold. It's for taking a 150 Franklin and modifying it using 165 valve train and cylinders The 150 exhaust valves and camshafts are about non-existent anymore. And the lobes on them were so small that when you send them in for regrind, there's not enough material left there to do much to them. So the STC that I've got, take the engine out, take it apart, you take the 150 parts on the list off, replace them with parts from a 165 or a helicopter engine. You put the heavy rods, heavy rockers, sodium cooled exhaust valves. You take the camshaft from the 165 and put in it and put it all back together, and you've got all the same parts basically as a 165 light case. That's what you've built. You run the same red line, 2600 RPM, but by changing the camshaft, you're changing the lift and the duration. So you're gaining horsepower. You get about 160 horsepower out of the 150 with no weight penalty. The advantage with it is converting to a 165, you got to put the rudder bungee trim kit, you got to take the fuel system out, convert it over from 3/8 to 1/2 inch lines and fuel valve. With the STC, it's still a 150 on paper with an STC internal parts change, so you don't have to do any of that. So there's about a 40-45 pound weight gain by not having to put all these other parts in it. So the difference in the 160 and the 165 horse is negligible then. Tim's airplane, he flew the Dash 3 down, but he's got a 1081 that we did that too. You can't tell the difference in that airplane for performance and a 1082 with a 165. They're real close. So anybody wants to look over the STC, I got a copy of it here you can flip through. Yeah, like I said, I picked up some of the extra tools that we picked up like we were talking about. If somebody wants to buy any, I've got some spares here.
Dave, I didn't quite understand the rocker arm compressor. You said you use a chain, did I understand?
No, the rocker arm compressor, you got that big elaborate tool that we passed around, had the spring in it.
Yes.
Okay, that works if it's on a bench or on a stand, but with the cowling on, it's hard to get that up under the front lip of the cowling. You can't do it. And I don't know where you'd even buy one of those tools. I've had that one for years. That's factory original. 1/4 inch chain link, same thing. If anybody wants them, I got some chain link pieces up here we cut out. 1/4 inch chain link, open it up, goes around the rocker at the valve end, put a 3/8 breaker bar or number 3 screwdriver, use that for your mechanical advantage and just put tension on it and pull it. Jack Stewart's going to demonstrate this a little bit more when he's here, I think tomorrow. Yeah, I think tomorrow. Put a little bit of pressure and just enough to collapse the lifter. Then you go in there with a feeler gauge and make sure that you got at least 40 thousandths. But you know, you can make all these elaborate push-pull tools and all this. This is normal stuff you'd have in your toolbox. It's simple. Yeah.
Yeah, I made one of the tools with the crowfoot on the end.
Yeah.
It worked, but I didn't like the impression that it made on the rocker arm.
Yeah. Now this just hooks it and you got enough mechanical advantage. It doesn't score or chip it. It doesn't bother anything. Yeah.
Okay.
It just, you know, the whole idea is try to keep it simple. Everybody's got the tools to maintain it. Anybody got any other questions?
Yeah, I was looking at this. This got a light rocker.
Yep.
A heavy one,
Yep.
and these stations are capped.
Yep.
Later ones are cast too, or?
Now, the Polish built engines, they were solid aluminum that were machined. If you got the steel sections like that, the supports, then those are Franklin. But if you got a PZL engine, it's got aluminum blocks with holes drilled in them. But if you look at the side profile on that, where the adjuster nut side is, there's substantial difference in material they put in it. It was a failure point. They were breaking.
Were the 165s, the 180s, 220s all the same?
No. The 165, they put the heavy rockers in it in about mid-60s. If you sent an engine back to Franklin back in the 60s, a 165 to get overhauled, they'd incorporate all these overhaul changes, the heavy rods, rockers, put later model valves. They do all this at the overhaul. The 180, the 220 were built later. I mean, those engines weren't built until about 1970, 71. It was like the last generation that they're putting out the door.
So when did they go to the 3A's adjustment screw on those?
Back in the 60s. Yeah. All the helicopter engines were always that. They always had the heavy ones in it.
Mine has the heavier one.
Yeah. The guy that owns Franklin now over in Poland, Roman, I haven't talked to him in about 3 years, one-on-one, but we email back and forth all the time. They don't sell parts here. The main issue wasn't the lack of people wanting to buy parts. It was logistics dealing with the FAA. The last when we talked to him about it, the FAA told him we don't have the manpower or the ability to set up somebody in Poland to oversee the production in the factory to make it US certified part. The FAA suggested that he moved the parts into somewhere in the country, 90%, 95% finished. Do one finished process in the United States, they could assign an inspector to it, and then they'd call that a US manufactured part. We had it set up where he had a friend that had a machine shop down in Fort Lauderdale, and we were going to set all that up, have him where he could bring parts in. They were going to do the finish like camshafts, broach a keyway in the end of it. Now it's a manufactured part, the FAA document it, and we'd be able to sell it. He can't sell anything in this country without the FAA's authorization and approval. And what he found was the politics end of it wasn't worth the amount of parts that he was going to sell. He's building parts, he's building engines, and he's overhauling engines in Poland. They're building stuff. The last I talked to him, they've got a amphibious twin that they're working on developing over there. Somebody is building. He's got two 220 Franklins on it. And I said, well, tell me. He said, I can't tell you any more about it. I can't even get you pictures. When I can, I will. So, but I mean, he's still building parts. There's a lot of stuff in Europe. I've wondered about, okay, well, if I can get him to send it to somebody I know in England, can they turn around and peel the label and send it back to me? But at that point, it doesn't have FAA approval. You know, he's got ESA approval under the European standards, but just the logistics. A lot of the problem with Roman is he speaks Polish. He does not speak English, so he's got to go through a translator. I had him at my shop, I don't know, 6-7 years ago in Detroit. He was in, I had a translator. I found a guy that spoke fluent Polish, and I had him hang around with us for 2 days, and we had Roman out in one of my helicopters with a Franklin in it, and just a neat guy. He's just a neat guy. He's down to earth. He was having a hard time finding anybody to make crankshafts because it's like, well, everybody's busy. I got to find somebody that can forge these crankshafts out of these blanks. Well, how many do you need? Well, I need 50. Oh, well, we don't want to deal with that little of an order. So all of a sudden, Roman got a crankshaft, and he says, see, I got them done. I said, well, who'd you find do them? He says, I bought my own foundry. But after talking to the guy, the translator, and it's like, he's like a kid. I mean, he really, really loves aviation. He's not dissing anybody from the States, not dealing with them. It's the politics and dealing with the FAA and everything else. But he's got his own airplanes. He's got a Piper Seneca with two 220 Franklins in it. That's his personal airplane. He rips around Europe in. But no, he's a neat guy to deal with. So, anybody got any questions?
What kind of sport do we get on the airplane?
Whoever squirreled parts away, stuff keeps popping up, yeah. Camshafts are hard to find. I think I've got 2 or 3 of them. Crankshafts, the guys with the 150, 165s have been putting them in their airplanes, so that kind of makes it harder. 220 is a hard engine. They didn't build that many of them, so they're hard for parts. And I'm guilty because I've taken 220s and it was a perfectly good engine. I rob all the upper end off of it and I put them in my helicopter engines because we got a 235 Franklin equivalent. Well, the cylinders, the pistons, all that stuff is hard to find. Well, it's worth more to me to put it in a helicopter engine than to put an airplane engine back together because they're so limited in demand. And then, a perfectly good 6-bolt crank is like gold. You make one phone call and it's gone. They're hard to find. But, yeah.
We started off talking about tail wheels, and on my 108-2, I had a lot of shimmy issues, and we went through all the standard fixes, replaced the leaf spring, and checked the spring tensions, and tire inflation, and on. And it all got better, but I still had shimmy. And so I bought the Alaska Bush Wheels shimmy dampener that just came out last year, late last year, and have it installed, and I've never had an issue since. So if you want to see it, it's out here on the line. It's about $900 to do that, but you know, I always had an issue if I had people in the back or on a crosswind. You know, so I would try to keep the tail up as long as possible, and even sometimes I'd get shimmy, sometimes not. But now I have no concern about bringing the tail wheel down at any speed. It works great.
Well,
You got a -3,
I've got a -2.
and it shimmy. That's unusual. Yeah.
Hey, take a look if you're interested.
All right. Anybody got anything else we want to cover? I'll be around all weekend, so if anybody's got any questions, just chase me down.
Dave, thank you.
Thanks.